peoples, and welcome back to another video. Now, I've heard a lot of people recently talking about how they have an idea but they don't know how to take it to a story. Now that I think about it, that's sort of where all writers start. They have an idea, but that's it. How do you turn that idea into a written story? Once you have your concept, or the beginnings of an idea that you want to turn into a concept, comment down below if you want me to do a video about how to come up with a concept. Once you have this base concept, you just have to come up with two simple things that will guide the rest of the story creating process. The beginning and the end. Before you freak out, I know that sounds very daunting. I don't even know how to write the thing. How do I know what the beginning and the end are? But really, it's very simple. If a story is primarily cause and effect, like a plane crashes, so then the characters have to survive and escape. There's an evil government, so then people have to overthrow it. It's all about cause and effect. The beginning would probably be the cause, and the end would probably be the effect, right? Let's take Star Wars as an example. There's a corrupt government. Naturally, people rise up against it. So the end effect would be that they eventually overthrow it, because the story would continue, most likely, until they were able to do that, or until they were wiped out completely. But, you know, we want a happy ending, so until they overthrow it, eventually. So think about your story, your concept, and think about what is the first scene? How do you want to introduce us to your world? To your characters? What is that first shot? Or, if you don't have the first shot in your mind yet, what is the event that will make all of your ideas come into action? What starts the domino effect that changes our protagonist's life? And then when it comes to the end, you really just have to think about, how do I want this story to end? Don't think how you reach that point. You don't have to worry about that yet. You just have to figure out how you want the story to end. How it would be, what's the word? Satisfying for it to end in your mind. So now that you have your concept, your beginning and your end, your cause and your effect, we can move on to the fun bit, the characters. Characters are going to be the heart of your story because, yes, an amazing mystery might be more of a plot-driven story, but at the end of the day, people are there because they love your characters, at least in my case. And I feel like a lot of others. Comment down below whether you prefer story-driven or plot-driven, and I feel like but those are the same thing. Comment down below if you prefer story-driven, like plot-driven, because they're the same thing, or character-driven stories. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. When it comes to fleshing out your characters, I personally sort of discover them as I write, and then in later edits, I'll go back and I'll fix the continuities that didn't line up when it came to their voice. But if you're more of a plotter than a pantser, you could fill out a chart. I love lists. I'm like a weird amalgamation of all the list-making skills of a plotter and all the impatience of a pantser. When I'm trying to figure out a character, I will often sit down and I will write out their traits, but more importantly, I will write out their flaws. If a character is perfect, they're not relatable and they usually come off as sort of annoying or flat. So adding multiple traits, some quirks, you know, like you're a chef. You're sitting there stirring your bowl of character stew and sprinkling in some character traits, and okay, this is getting weird. Never mind. Go back to the list. The list idea works better. Don't make soup. Character list-wise, I start with a name. A name makes such a difference. Having a name instantly puts a character's image into my mind. Even if it's not a complex image, even if it's just like, they have brown hair, like me. I instantly know something about them just from their name. First name is great. If you can give them a last name too, that's even better. Then you move down to their appearance, because depending on the way they style their hair, the way they dress, these tell you little things about their personality and their quirks, and that will help you, when you get to actually writing those down, know a little bit more about them. So I do my name, their appearance, then I usually do an age, but it's usually like a rough ballpark. I'm like between the ages of 30 and 37. Not usually super specific unless I have to be. After age, I usually also include their gender and their sexuality, and then I will go down to their traits and their flaws. These are sort of the same thing, so if you want to combine them and just have it be a section of traits, negative and positive, you can do that. I often find when I just label it traits, I'll write a bunch of really good things about them, and then I'll like forget the flaws. When it comes to traits, flaws, what you should and shouldn't include, don't overthink it. If you know something about them, if you know they like to keep their hair neat and tidy, write down stuff that you feel like is important, and if someone else would be like, you don't need to note that, you wanted to note it. You know, it's fine. No one else is going to see your notes anyway, unless you want to show them to people, which I never want to show people my notes because they're so messy, so messy. Sometimes I just throw a bunch of Pinterest images at it and I'm like, that's my notes. When I look at this, I picture a character, so that's my notes. That is another thing. If you don't know what you picture them looking like, Pinterest. Great place to look for inspiration. I use that all the time for Dungeons and Dragons. But I'm getting really sidetracked. This was supposed to be an easy to follow little list of things to do, and I'm sort of just like chatting. I should have filmed a vlog today, clearly. What if I just turn this into a vlog midway? Would that be really confusing?
So guys, I just wanted to talk to you today about this curtain and how I've had it since I was like 8.
And anyway, back to the video. So yeah, in the character building area is backstory. Backstory is a huge source of traits and is a wonderful way for you to get to know them a little bit better. So I do really suggest you don't have to write up their backstory, but if you just want to think about it, or if you want to choose a specific moment where maybe their flaw or a certain trait comes from, like one of my characters in my current work in progress, which I will link to a video, I have a bunch of writing vlogs about that. One of my characters in that, she has sort of a rough relationship with her parents, and from that came this flaw, which is her primary flaw. This flaw affects how she interacts with everybody. It affects how she goes about her day-to-day life, it affects the relationships she's in, and part of the story is going to be her slowly realizing that that's not necessarily true, but having a source for it to come from does really make sense, and it adds, I feel like, a layer of depth, especially because, spoiler alert, you get to eventually see that moment. Third on the list of characters, after you give them their traits and their flaws, you figure out some backstory, is character voice. This I feel like sort of comes along naturally by figuring out their traits and flaws, but if you're having trouble with it, you can sit down and you can think about words that only they would use. Maybe they're insecure, and so instead of saying, we should do this, they're like,
what do you guys think? Maybe we could do this.
You know, whatever it is, just figuring out ways for them to come off through their dialogue, the way that you picture them being inside their minds. Because your readers aren't going to see that list of traits and backstory that you wrote up. So unless you actually show the scene in which something happened or somebody actually explains it about them, people aren't going to know unless you can show them versus telling them. Next, we are almost done prepping your concept into a story. This is the part where it really takes it from an idea to something you could sit down and write, and that is the outline. Now, I will go into 2 methods for this. One is more pantser-friendly and one is more plotter-friendly. First off, let's start with the pantser-friendly one because, you know, that's what I like to do. If you're doing the beginning, middle, and an end, I would just line up what's going to happen in each of those. So if you're like in Act 1, we will have the moment that sparks our story. Like in this how to outline and plan a comic book video, I will link it up above. I use the example of a plane crash in the Arctic and people who had to survive afterwards. Act 1, which is like the first set of chapters that are establishing sort of the situation. The plane crash, getting to know all of the people that survived, and probably the first signs of civilization for them to move towards. Other stuff would happen as well, but these would be the 3 primary plot driving things, and the rest would be more like subplots. Then in the middle act, I would probably have a plot twist of some sort. It doesn't have to be major. It doesn't even have to be necessarily a plot twist. It could just be something exciting and new happening, like maybe you introduce a new character, something so that the middle isn't boring. You don't want people to be reading the beginning, be really invested and excited, hit the middle and be like,
oh, this book just got boring all of a sudden.
And then they never reach the end. There has to be just as much exciting stuff happening in the middle as in the beginning and the end with the climax. So with the middle, I would usually add in some sort of little plot twist, like in the case of Snow, which was the poorly named Arctic survival story from that video. I decided that they would come across a research facility as they found signs of civilization in the first set, and in the second act, these signs would lead them to a research facility, but something shady was happening at the research facility. I wasn't totally sure what. I could figure that out later. I just needed to know that they were going to reach a research facility and that something was shady would be happening there. And so they would probably have to flee, or maybe they would have to drive the people out. Whatever the case, it wasn't going to be a permanent rest stop for them. So that adds a little bit more intrigue. Your readers are like, okay, there's a new situation. And then through the middle, instead of being like, it's the same situation, they're like, they found something. You know, it's like exciting. It's a new bit of curiosity to them. What's going on? So then in that second act, I would outline as find research facility, realize all is not well with research facility, and then maybe they'd be divided. You know, like maybe some of them would want to stay at the research facility despite the fact that they were being shady, and some of them would want to move on because they didn't feel safe there. So maybe the group would be divided. And then the third act, which would be the end and the climax of the story, maybe in this case it would be they actually do find civilization. Like maybe they build a radio, like they stole supplies from the research facility and they build a radio, they call for help. Maybe there's like something so it doesn't go quite right. They do eventually escape because the story has to end. So that's sort of the pantser-friendly version. You're just outlining Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3, and letting yourself sort of fill in the gaps beyond that. The more plotter-focused version is actually deciding how many chapters will be in your book, laying them all out on a page, and deciding what will happen every single individual chapter. I have definitely done this, and I do like to do this once I sort of start writing and I sort of get a feel for how many pages will be in each chapter, how much can be accomplished in each chapter. Then I'll often take my rough outline, which is like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and I will turn it into a chapter-by-chapter breakdown, just so that I know what I have to do and everything. And especially if it's going to be one novel, it's sort of good to know that you can fit it all into the right length. The next part after you have the outline is world building. And the reason that I put world building after the outline is because maybe some people would want to design the entire world and then just set the story in it, but I personally like to world build specifically the areas I know my characters are going to visit. So like, why would I design, I don't know, like a trapping town when it's not gonna be in the story and they're gonna go to the research facility instead? So this way, you're not wasting any world building time and you're not asking yourself questions or getting stuck on things that you're not necessarily going to actually need to know. Don't do this after you've written it though, like I did. That's a mistake. Yeah, so definitely don't do it that way. The world building stage doesn't have to be scary. I was always so scared of world building, but you just need to know how everything works and you don't have to worry about necessarily throwing all of that information at your readers in giant info dumps, because nobody likes those. When it comes to world building, I just try and break it up into very tiny and manageable chunks. So let's take a made-up science fiction world, right? So let's say that you're in a science fiction world, they're hunting. You decided it was sort of a swampy climate. You didn't have to explain why it was swampy because nobody's really gonna ask you that. So you just decide they were in a swamp on this alien planet, and then your next thought is, they're hunting in this scene. What are they hunting? You just need to come up with some sort of creature and then maybe give it a characteristic that makes it convenient to live in the swamp. Maybe it's an avian creature because the smushy ground makes it hard for larger mammals and such to walk around, so all the creatures here fly. Or they're fish, or whatever. Whatever the case, just try and ask yourself tiny questions. When it comes to the method that I found works best for me, just because I'm a lazy world builder, is just I'll ask myself tiny little questions, and I won't necessarily even write them down or anything, just so long that I know that it makes sense. That's good enough for me. Next and final step is to compile and review. You take everything that you've written down, thought of so far. I would just compile it into one document, whether that's like something on Google Docs, an actual notebook, the Notes app on your phone, whatever it is. Just try and get it all in one place so you can refer to it, tweak anything that doesn't match up with the continuity now when you're first fleshing out the idea, and you have a story. Yes, you now do have to write it, the terrifying part, but you now know how the story begins, how it ends, who the people in it are, how the story is going to progress. You know all the places you're going to visit, you know what those places are like, so it really makes it a lot more manageable feeling than just diving into it with just like, I know this is how it starts, or I'd like this to happen. Gives you more than one scene, gives you a cohesive story and concept to write. Now, I am either holding or going to be holding, depending on when this video releases, a very special challenge for myself and anyone who would like to participate here on my channel to write a novel in 60 days. I will link to the video up above about it. Hopefully you join in, because now that you have an awesome and fleshed out concept, all you need to do is write it, and this is the perfect motivation. Join a community of fellow writers as we all try and achieve something that seems impossible but can't be because other books have been published. And I attempt to turn 3 books worth of story into one tiny novel, write it all in 60 days, and vlog the process simultaneously. I mean, what part of you doesn't want to watch that? I'm not even guaranteeing I succeed. I'm just saying I'm gonna try, guys. If I totally fail, just pretend I didn't. Thank you. I appreciate it. You're the best. I don't know how to end this. I'm trying to think of something witty, but I can't. Bye.